Now, I wouldn't normally watch a movie categorized as a science fiction romantic action film, nor would I ever feel the need to review one, normally. Not just because the algorithm would mangle my channel for months after I did it, but because the movies I cover have a certain vibe to them, and throwing something random into the mix might annoy some of the people I am lucky to have watching me semi-regularly. But today's movie was also supposed to be a horror. Given Apple TV produced it, and they've got a decent enough reputation, and as I actually recognized the actors playing the main characters, I thought, why not? Not to mention, of a copy of the movie, I've got an active Apple Plus subscription, which I love and enjoy regularly in exchange for my monthly subscription fee. So, last night I got comfy with my usual pad of paper and pen and settled in for the first of the two viewings I always give movies when I am planning on recapping them. And by the end of the first viewing, I was sure I didn't need a second viewing, and here's why. This movie knows less about who it is than half of the 14-year-olds in America. Sometimes it's a character study focused on growth and personal internal conflict. Sometimes it's a romantic movie about two people from very different upbringings coming together to find commonalities in the most trying and unstable of environments. Sometimes it's a historical mystery story. And sometimes it's a gruesome body horror. And all of those things are going on during the times the movie is not being a fast-paced, full of fights action movie. I didn't bother extending my usual respect for the film with a second viewing because this movie is all of these things all at once, and by way of definition, to me anyways, that makes it none of them at the same time. In keeping with the good algorithm's reasonable and logical demands, I'll do one of my quick recaps to help explain my observations. Just be aware I am going to be spoiling this movie, which is kind of like announcing to your dinner guests the kimchi you're serving them is fermented, meaning it's already spoiled. The movie follows Levi and Drasa, played respectively by Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy. They are a pair of top-notch snipers. One is from America and the other is from the East. Their governments recruited them to stand on either respective sides of the big cavernous hole in the ground. The location is rigged with automatic turrets and tripwires, and their job is to maintain these automated defenses like maintenance engineers. They're assigned to these desolate posts for 1 full year. But things get really interesting when you find out they're not there to stop people going into the big cavernous hole in the ground. They are supposed to be stopping things from coming out of it. And while they're doing that for a year, they're not allowed to talk to each other. The only communications they have with the outside world are through a monthly radio update from the big bosses back home. I didn't watch this film twice because I knew the things I couldn't figure out after one viewing wouldn't clear themselves up if I watched this movie 27 times. Por ejemplo, neither of these snipers were compromised mentally or physically. They're both actively working and they're both at the top of their games with guns, so why the hell would they say yes to a full year's assignment without knowing where they were going, or why they were going there, or which enemy they were fighting, or why they were fighting that enemy, or what the enemy's capabilities were? And then after they got there, why wouldn't they be allowed to talk to each other? They're fighting a common enemy in a secret location they're both privy to as per their security clearance levels. Their attacks are literally coordinated with each other. They're a team. Their survival and the survival of the rest of the world at large depends entirely on their coordinated efforts. Eventually, of course, your head does numb to all that stuff because that little voice comes and whispers, "Shut up, Johnny's logical recap head. Just watch the movie and enjoy the loud noises and the pretty people," which, of course, I tried to do. But then I couldn't figure out why there's only him and her guarding a big cavernous hole in the ground with things sporadically climbing out of it that could do all of us in with their clearly nefarious intentions. I mean, do these things only surface while our fearless, adventure-seeking, highly trained lead characters are awake? Or not in the bathroom taking a shower? Or when they're not working really hard trying to convince us they're edgy by wearing nothing but black and dancing around to the Ramones? What happens if one of these things decides to crawl sideways, to the left or to the right? What if they don't climb straight up the wall towards the camera and our two main characters who are waiting for them with weapons? And given this is clearly a secret government operation, and secret government operations do not struggle with funding in America, Why are the two main characters hired as backups to automated equipment instead of fixing the automated equipment? Actually, that question just answered itself. Maybe I should have watched it twice. And after the very first undead thing emerged from the depths and climbed up the wall towards them with "I'm going to do horrible, horrible things to you" in its eyes, why didn't they leave quickly and immediately and right away? Are we to believe members of our armed forces are so stoic and riveted to their tasks in the name of patriotism in 2025, they would be totally fine being nominated as the next sitting lunch targets for a demonic army of animated tree monsters for 365 straight days? So, understandably and predictably, the longer they are there, the lonelier they both get, and they end up sending each other messages over the big cavernous hole in the ground that is sometimes miles away, and other times it's just right over there. Eventually, as we all probably would, Levi ditches his beautiful government-issued hillside studio apartment to go check out Drassa's, which happens to have a piano. They spend the night together, and it goes exactly as you would think it would, and the next morning when Levi's zipping his way back over, his zipper breaks, probably from overuse the night before. And because it is 2025 and some of the entertainment industry hates us, Drassa leaps into the big cavernous hole in the ground without thinking twice about what or who might be waiting at the bottom. In keeping with the movie's own setup and set of rules, if one of them dies, the other one's meant to be a backup, and her leaping headlong into literal oblivion risks leaving the big cavernous hole in the ground unattended on both sides. That means she possesses the skill and the prowess to be recruited for this high-level assignment in the first place, but all that skill and acumen goes right out the window at the most vital moment in the film because Levi was a good kisser. They find each other really easily at the bottom. That is to say, the dainty, adorable 5'8", 105-pound Anya Taylor-Joy, whom will remain like this in my mind forever, saves her male counterpart from sure death. It turns out the big cavernous hole in the ground was a facility facilitating, is that right? Bioweaponry back in World War II. And as I know how intelligent my viewers are from speaking to some of them regularly, I'm sure you've probably already guessed things went totally sideways down there after an earthquake caused some kind of a containment problem. These things that they're fending off are actually the researchers. Kind of. All these years later, as I'm sure you've also guessed, a dodgy government contractor's been studying these folks in hopes of creating a new breed of unstoppable, wicked, awesome, super undead soldiers as a weapon to probably run alongside a herd of velociraptors from Jurassic Park. I mean the original Jurassic Park, the rest of them can feck F. And the rest of the story is about them getting out of the big cavernous hole in the ground, and once they've accomplished that nearly impossible but really, really easy for them task, Romeo and Juliet Rambo also have to fight off the dodgy government contractors. No, seriously, isn't this great? And of course, those dodgy government contractors who are led by none other than Sigourney Weaver, whom I love, is physically led by Sigourney Weaver. Like, she actually goes out into the fight with them. Because we all know how easy it is to get our own direct manager's assistance with our daily jobs. Never mind the head of the corporation tagging along to oversee an unpredictable gunfight between dozens and dozens of people and a never-ending stream of mutated beings whose CGI is worse than some of my own.
Let's take a look at Trollhunter's plot and we can decide whether...
She's also physically present for a battle which might potentially end with a nuclear explosion if everything goes wrong. And everything does go wrong. But then they meet in France a few months later. I don't know how Levi found her in France, given he's definitely lost all of his military clearances and connections after this disastrous assignment's cataclysmic ending, which Romeo and Juliet Rambo were entirely responsible for, I might remind you. You'd think both ex-soldiers would be hiding somewhere permanently instead of serving rabbit pie on a patio. Anyways, I think I've made my thoughts clear on the plot itself, but the other half of this movie's issues start with its initial conception. Combining film genres takes a calculated, steady, intentional hand, and it's the easiest way to ruin an otherwise promising premise. Mixing horror and comedy, for example, is very hard. If you make it too humorous, you negate the horror. If you make it too scary, the jokes will feel out of place. If you're one of the rare writers capable of combining the two successfully, think how exponentially harder it gets to throw in some historical mystery alongside some sci-fi elements and then some body horror. Now, Would I watch a movie that did combine all of these elements properly? You bet your little bum I would. But I'm gonna head way out on a limb here and announce with total confidence in front of the entire world, it will never happen. The action in this movie felt orchestrated and acted, which of course it was, but I'm accustomed to watching people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis enact these kind of scenes. No harm to either of them, but neither of these actors makes me think about action. Miles Teller blew my mind in Whiplash, but not for his sweat and his bleeding fingers. It was for his determination and his obsession and his perseverance. You already know I think very similar of Anya Taylor-Joy, but if I haven't made it clear enough, she's not a Lithuanian sniper. A masterclass chess player or a prostitute in a 4-star restaurant? Absolutely. And in case you're wondering, she's not Furiosa to me either. There were brief glimpses in the film of both of them displaying these qualities during the quieter, more reserved sections of the story, but they're buried so far under all the other distractions, I'm kind of struggling to recall any of them in hindsight. It goes without saying I'm here for the alleged horror elements I heard so much about prior to watching this movie, but the moment I saw the first poorly animated, easily killed thing crawling out of the big cavernous hole in the ground, way too early in the story, I might add, my hopes sank as fast as their bodies did when the bullets started hitting them. And now it is time for the part that gets me yelled at. To me, as I've already mentioned, this is Anya Taylor-Joy. She kept me glued to the screen in Robert Eggers' The Witch. She nailed an accent miles away from her own, and she showed a deep understanding of an era none of us have ever known anything about directly, all while being 18 in her feature film debut. But now that Hollywood snatched her up, she looks like this. I know The Witch was over 10 years ago, and I'm not saying she can't act anymore. I'm saying the opposite of that. She's a magnificent actor. But now, all I see when she's on screen is the big cavernous holes under her cheeks where her Hollywood surgeon gorged out all her healthy, natural, adorable fat. She is free to do whatever the hell she wants, and I would never judge anybody for making themselves feel better about themselves. But we focus on their faces in the movies, sometimes on a 30-foot high screen, and always in super crisp, stupid, clear definition. And I just don't see her anymore. I can only see the mounds of insecurity Hollywood has clearly heaped on her young shoulders. To me, after my single viewing, I felt like I'd watched something written by a room full of people who thought they'd appease a wider audience by throwing in a bit of something for every kind of viewer. And I was very surprised to find out it was actually written, at least in part, by Scott Derrickson, who also brought us The Exorcism of Emily Rose and Sinister and The Black Phone, all of which, whether you like them or not, had tight writing and a real sense of identity in terms of the story they were telling us. The Gorge forces me to think of the term show business and how much the business end of that term has shifted to the front of the word without any of us really noticing. Movies like this make me notice because I can't believe anybody involved with its production from top to bottom cared about the story it was meant to tell. If you have a copy of The Gorge, if you have an active subscription to Apple Plus, this movie won't wreck your week or anything. In fact, you may end up liking it a lot more than I did. But if there's any scenario which requires you to part with your very hard to earn at the moment money in order to watch this film, I would say give it a miss and keep your eye out for whatever's coming next. As I'm sure you know, nowadays there's always something coming next, and as movie fans, we have no choice but to stay excited about that fact. Until next time, folks,